Welcome in everyone. Today is the start of a new series in Cities Skylines 2. If you've been keeping up with the videos on the channel, you know that we just finished a 3-part series of videos that took place while Cities 2 was in early access, and now we're starting our first series that'll continue post-launch. So if you are new here, be sure to hit the subscribe button, leave a like, and drop a comment down below with thoughts and suggestions for the next episode. So what is this series going to be about? Well, it's going to be a little bit more relaxed, and we're probably going to be learning things together. And the optimal goal here is just for us to build a city and hopefully find all the little quirks and things like that that can help everybody, including myself, build cities in Cities 2. Since the game is releasing, we're all going to be sort of picking it up and learning at the same time. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun to kind of test the water and see what we can develop and what ideas we can share with one another. So the map I selected is actually Mountain Village, and the city name is Cedarburg, but that's just what Cities 2 generated for me, but I decided to keep it. I don't have a crazy plan in terms of what we're going to do, other than I need to figure out how to incorporate different things into my city builds in Cities 2, because like I mentioned in my early access previews, there are some things that are just feel different from Cities 1, and it's been kind of difficult for me to pick up on how I want to build in Cities 2, because I do feel like my building style may change a little bit, at least for right now. So besides just learning Cities 2 a little bit further, what are some things I really want to incorporate? First, I think I want to find better ways of zoning. How can I lay out zones so not only do they look more realistic, but they're also a little bit more appeasing? I also want to find ways of incorporating major transport networks closer to downtown. I felt like in my early access build that everything got really spread out and didn't feel as cohesive. So finding ways to include highways near downtown or interconnected along with railways would be ideal. So one of the first challenges we're going to take on is making a road that can kind of act as a seawall, and that's because the road has the fill option beneath it. Now this isn't something that you can manually set. You sort of have to force Cities 2 to do it. And that's something that I hope changes in the future. I'd love the option to be able to force cities to place the retaining wall underneath the road. And I'm having to use a road to create the retaining wall because currently, at least right now in base game Cities 2, there is no feature for keys. So how can you replicate this? Well, it's not that difficult, but it is very finicky, especially near water. Ideally, you can set up 2 levels of terrain and basically draw the road over that change in terrain. In an effort to make it seem more like a retaining wall, I'm trying to level the road at the upper end with the terrain that's there. That way it remains zonable, whereas if you elevate it any more above that terrain height, you'll have just a bridge, which won't be able to be zoned. There may be other height changes within the town, and I'm going to use this method for a couple of those potentially. But for now, this is meant to be the river's edge. So once I get this into place, I will actually re-terraform the river to go up to the wall itself. But it's much easier to do this over just land, because as you can see, there are going to be times where it's going to be very finicky and it won't want to be placed over water despite having a height to it. Sometimes the overlap indicator just seems hypersensitive to different situations, whether it's water or overlapping different roads and stuff like that. You can't always get what you want until you really start to play with things. And sometimes you can get it to bend to your will, but other times you just have to find other ways of doing whatever you're setting out to do. This road is going to not only operate as our retaining wall against the river, but it's also going to have to support some traffic, considering this is going to be at the edge of our downtown area, or at least what I'm projecting to be our downtown. One of the difficulties I've had with Cities 2 is also making sure that I unlock roads early on so that I have access to everything I need to make the adjustments I want to make to accommodate what I'm building. Because as you know, right now at the very beginning, you only have small roads and these medium roads, and you're pretty limited even with that. This would be considered a vanilla playthrough, so all our unlocks and progressions are in place. The only thing that I've turned off is disasters. Oh, and chirper. So you can see how clean the water is against that wall and that first road. And I want the rest of the town to kind of be built off a grid system that leaves that and begins to space itself out. And then you notice that I've leveled a lot of terrain away from the water, but I want to do a tier eventually. This map doesn't have a ton of variety in terms of height. It's a little bit more smooth and flat versus some of the other maps in Cities 2 where you're going to have a lot of elevation change. So with that gradual height change versus some of the maps, again, where the height change is much more steep, I want to try to incorporate roads to sort of cover that up and blend the city together a little better. That's specifically in the downtown area. Obviously, with some of the suburbs and stuff like that, we may be able to incorporate height a little differently. I just think for the downtown space, I do want to try to condense the area as much as I can and make it seem as dense as possible, like I mentioned earlier. So one of the things I'm thinking I'm going to do is I'm probably going to replace this entire highway system that runs onto this side of the river. And I'm going to somehow try to incorporate that into the city or running through the city at some point. That's obviously going to take time because, again, we do have to unlock it. So it's pretty much going to be a temporary setup until we get to that point. So everything you're going to see early on is just trying to get the basics down so we can start zoning, bringing people in. And then I would also keep in mind that I feel like the city and the town itself, especially the downtown area, is going to see a lot of evolution from where it starts with a lot of low density, residential, maybe some low density commercial. And it's going to, I think, slowly sort of evolve into something that is much more like a city downtown. Something else I'd like to incorporate more closely into this downtown area would be some sort of train system with a passenger station. Now, something that's not necessarily on by default would be contour lines when you're doing roads and stuff. So you're going to want to check that snapping option when you're doing some of your road design or road work. It's pretty helpful to see that, obviously. Typically, it's something that I will forget about for a minute, and then I realize, oh, great, all my roads are bumpy. Why didn't I know that? Oh, because I had it off. And some of that's because I think you have to check it on depending on what road you're utilizing. So that's another factor to keep in mind, is that as you're switching through different types of roads, it may actually not be on for some other roads. So just a helpful reminder. Anyway, I'm going to go ahead and set up as much of a grid system here near the water as I can and try to keep it a little bit even, but also find ways of diversifying the grid space. I wouldn't mind having a few of these just squares start off as residential and then actually converting them to parks later on in the city build. I could use the grid tool for this, but I typically prefer just to do it by hand and shape things the way I want. Something about that process is kind of nice. I'll use the grid tool to fill in certain areas if I need to, but I do enjoy a little bit of creating these from scratch. I think from the river up to where I intend to put the highway system, which is actually going to be on that terrain change, that height change you see at the top of the screen, I want to have the grid running one way, and then after that I want to see if we can shift part of the grid to kind of mix it up and make it look a little more dynamic than it is right now. So one thing you should always check before you start placing your industrial is which way the wind is blowing. This actually was a problem for me on my very first city. I realized that I put my city downwind. So you want to check this before you get into putting down, your power plant or maybe some of your industrial or whatever might produce air pollution. This also goes for setting down anything having to do with sewage. You need to check and see which way the water is flowing so you can keep that away from your city intake, and you may want to keep it away from the city in general. So keep in mind that you can import and export quite a bit into your city, and it's often beneficial to have some export, especially electricity early on while there's a little bit lower demand, so you can make a little extra cash. So once we get our groundwater pump in, I'm going to set that up here, and then I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of zone in and get our sewage system in. I accidentally hit play instead of getting the sewage in first, so they were a little bit upset. And voila, we've hit Tiny Village, our first milestone. So with Tiny Village, we're going to unlock 1 development point and 3 expansion points along with some cash. Because I know I want to change the infrastructure and how the roads are set up, I'm going to lean pretty heavily in using development points in the roads tab. So our first point is going to go to Advanced Road Services, which will unlock road maintenance facilities and some odds and ends for controlling different roads. But more importantly, it is a stepping stone to getting to highway and interchanges. I'm also going to use our expansion points to open up a little bit further downriver and some of the area along the highway on the other side of the river that we'll be tweaking a little bit later. And like I mentioned earlier, I'm going to continue to move the sewage output further downriver until I have some other options for handling some of that dirty water. From some of my early access builds, what I noticed is I don't really like putting a lot of commercial back to back. I don't feel like it looks as good unless you're able to incorporate enough space to have an alleyway. So I'm going to try to avoid that, but I am going to intermix it in some places with residential as well. We're going to go ahead and place a landfill down to handle garbage, although I do think this is something that I may shift in position later. So our industrial area is going to look pretty straightforward. I'm not going to do anything very fancy here because I don't know if this is really where it's going to stay. I think I may kind of shift the industrial area to the other side of the railway a little bit later in the build itself. There's some things I'm just doing on a temporary level so that I can polish out basics of the city first and then really try to apply a little more energy around how I want to set other things up. In addition to unlocking the recycling center, we've also unlocked the clinic, which I've added to our downtown area. Right now, I'm going to be pretty focused on just trying to make sure I can accommodate demand by expanding our downtown, adding more residential and commercial, and of course, every so often dipping our toes back into the industry area to give us some more jobs for the city. I'm also going to be looking to extend the road that runs along the river line to kind of get a little bit further. I don't want it to go on forever, but something that looks a little bit more complete than what I have. Another ploppable building we can go ahead and place down that came with opening up the healthcare tab after our last milestone would be a graveyard. So I'm going to go ahead and incorporate this here at the top of downtown, which I think might actually fit pretty well into our city. So I mentioned earlier that I wanted to include some parks in some of the squares that I'd made with the roads, and I think that'll be something cool once downtown begins to expand and grow into what I hope it could be. Now, some of that may come from an influence of Savannah, Georgia, a city I visited, where you have just squares in the middle of town and stuff that kind of breaks up the monotony of just houses. But a lot of it is just historical areas, especially for the North American side of things. And they also have a graveyard in the middle of their town that's, right next to a fire station and some commercial, but there's also a ton of residential in that area. It's very, very beautiful with these long avenues going through, and then you'll just go every couple blocks you'll have some sort of little, almost like town square looking space that's a park, but typically it has some historic value for why it's there. So let's jump back to our finicky river wall here, and we're going to try to continue to extend it. I'm debating whether to use harder angles at some points versus curves, only because of the zoning side of things. Like, I feel like I can accommodate the harder angles a little bit more efficiently than some of the longer curves that I've been trying to implement, but I think it's going to be a little bit of a balance of both. I also want to try to make this as even as possible with a road that comes down from where the highway will eventually be. In cities too, I often find myself looking for ways of evening out roads, and sometimes this requires placing that additional road down or drawing some additional roads to, shorten segments and things. Little tricks that you had in Cities 1 that I felt like some of the mods may have helped with a little bit more. I'm not sure, but I find myself doing it more in Cities 2 at times, which is kind of odd. I thought that, I guess, a little bit more would have been incorporated to help with this, but I know that, for example, if you draw a segment and you go to delete that segment, right, it might be longer than you expected. So sometimes I'll use roads to basically add nodes, and then I'll be able to do some of the work I need to do to clean up some edges. And then I'll also use additional roads as kind of guidance for how long a certain road should be that I'm actually applying. And then I'll go back and delete what was there for scratch. That's not to say that Cities 2 doesn't have a lot of tools for roads. They're all around snapping, and there's certain times where I need snapping to happen a certain way, and I can't necessarily get that effect. I may not be able to measure a certain road the way I would expect to measure. So I use some scratch roads to help measure certain things. And sometimes the issue I have is actually measuring, the distance of a road or something that I'm applying. Like, it gives you the meters that it is instead of, saying how many units it is. And that can be a little bit difficult to get a reading of in some situations. Like, you'll be applying the road and it won't give you the length. So you have to do a road next to that or just draw one to figure out how long the road is. There's just some little things like that I think need some tweaks. And then it would make a lot of the snapping and everything even more valuable. And one little tip here is that if you're using the tree brush and you want to get rid of all the trees in a certain space that maybe are, predetermined on the map, you actually need to uncheck the box that says, match trees, and then you can get rid of all of any type of tree from your map. Just a little thing to note. It's that second snapping option under the tree brush. So with that, we've hit our small village milestone, giving us 2 more development points, 4 expansion points, and a little bit more cash, being $700,000, which is pretty helpful. We're going to go ahead and use our development points in the roads tab by unlocking highways. So we're a little bit closer to having things like large roads and interchanges. That'll be what we need to really update the transportation element of getting into the city. But with this milestone, we've unlocked education. And if you watch my early access videos, you'll know that education can play an important part of how your city develops long term. So you really want to focus on this to some degree, especially when it comes to adding colleges and universities in. And specifically if you're looking to add office space and really develop your city into maybe something a little bit bigger. So a tiny village, you actually unlock row housing, but with the small village, we've unlocked medium density residential. I'm going to hold off on actually zoning this right now. I want to focus primarily on row houses and just light density residential, even though there will probably be demand at some point to incorporate medium density. But that is essentially going to be how we replace a lot of our low density residential in our downtown area. So jumping forward a little bit, you can see how quickly the city is developing. We have a lot of row housing towards the water and in some spots away from the water as well, kind of encompassing some of these low density residential. So we're going to go ahead and use some of our expansion points to open up a little bit more of a build area. And some of that's going to be focused on expanding downtown, but also making sure we have plenty of room to include some interchanges once we unlock them at the entrance to the city. So I've made some adjustments to the terrain around downtown, giving us a little bit more room at this height And again, we're going to try to cover up some of these height changes using some of the roads, and that's going to be a heck of a project. But just by keeping up with some of the demand, we've hit large village, which gives us 3 more development points, some expansion points, and a little more cash. We're going to go ahead and continue to unlock things under the road development tree and try to get a little bit closer to being able to do everything we need to do for roads so that we can correct our entrance area. And first we have to unlock large roads. Now, I tend to hold on to 1 extra development point. I don't know why. I guess it's the hoarder in me wanting to make sure that I have one in case I need to unlock something. I don't know, but we have 1 extra one we're going to hold on to right now in case we need it to unlock something else. But the goal is to hit the next milestone, which should give us enough points to unlock everything we need to actually redo the highway entrance into the city and begin to expand the highway infrastructure behind the city on the top end here. With that milestone, we've unlocked police stations, fire stations, and now we have our first signature building being the Rock Musician Mansion, which is something that we'll place probably in the near future, somewhere where we're going to keep some suburban homes, or right on the outskirts of downtown might be kind of cool. So we're going to go ahead and place a fire station and a police station, get those implemented. I don't know if this is where they're going to stay, but for now, this is where we're going to place them to accommodate the demand for it, obviously. And getting them in the city is going to give us some XP as well. So we'll be well on our way to the next milestone. So there's some things that I want to try with the row homes. I want to try to leave a little bit of additional space around them to actually add in some pathing, pedestrian pathing, maybe behind some of the houses or whatever, just to break them up a little bit. And I'm also going to be dezoning edges so that all the row houses actually spawn on a specific road that I want them to. So some of these blocks where you see row housing might have additional pedestrian paths. And as you can see, by adding row homes to the city, you're going to get an additional signature building that is actually going to fit as sort of a row home of itself. You obviously want to use these signature buildings in your cities because they do provide benefits for your sims. But the other side of it is that you unlock those by incorporating certain zones into your city, or enough of zones, and by hitting milestones. So they're pretty straightforward to get, and you can check that by looking at the signature buildings themselves and get an idea of what you're going to need to do to unlock them. So jumping forward a little bit, you can see how much the city has grown, and we have plenty to do. But we have had some decent growth here, and we're almost at the point where that highway running along the terrain change, the downtown will almost be to that point, which is great. So we're about to hit our next milestone, being Grand Village, which will give us the development points to unlock interchanges, which is also labeled intersections. If there's any confusion, that's what I'm talking about. And that'll give us all the interchanges we need for the city that are in base game cities too. So while we unlock intersections, you're going to see that we have a pretty good amount of money. We also have more expansion points. We're up to 12 now. And we still have that 1 development point I'm hanging on to. So we're going to go ahead and delete some of the infrastructure that's in place to give us some room to put down our interchanges and start working on a new system for entering the city area. I'm also going to simplify a little bit of the terrain height. I want to kind of operate off of 2 different heights here right now, although I do think that I should have leveled some things a little bit differently when I started. Now this height change here that I'm leveling is something that's going to be important because we're going to try to hide that under the highway that we're going to draw on the top side of the city here. So I don't want it to be too high because that's going to mean the retaining wall side of it's going to be really tall, and I don't want it to look too wild. I've tried to do a good job of that, especially along the river as well. As one would expect, these interchanges are pretty large, so I'm going to go ahead and place this just as a template to see where I need things to line up at, because we're going to have to shift what's across the river a little bit to accommodate how it's going to align with this. Now we're going to go in and delete the infrastructure that's here on this side of the river and replace it, basically. Keeping it pretty simple, though. It's going to match pretty much what it is. It's just going to be adjusted for placement. I could totally see us coming back at some point and switching out this interchange to accommodate, more traffic, or to have different options for directions. But for right now, we're going to keep it, again, sort of what we had. We're just going to adjust placement, and we're going to reconnect it to the highway system that's already in place. So thankfully in Cities 2, you have the parallel road tool, which can help you do this much more efficiently. The only time that I find some issue with the parallel road tool is in close connections, or if you just need to make some specific adjustment, because the roads do react very closely to how you place your cursor. So when you see that preview of what the road's going to look like, you can make adjustments just by cursor placement, on the top or bottom side of the road, depending on your screen position as well. So sometimes, just to refine the connections a little bit better, I'll go in and I'll actually get the parallel road tool pretty close, and then I'll make some adjustments with just single roads when I'm actually making the connection to certain things. Now, a lot of the work I'm doing now is just going to be a setup for next episode, because we're going to be pretty focused on trying to figure out how to integrate that highway system into the downtown area and making sure that we have pretty good connections for expandability as the city continues to grow. I'm not great at road design, so please bear with me. So I had the interchange already placed up here, and like I said, I was kind of using it to measure, but something that I realized is that since part of it is elevated and part of it is ground level, I'm going to rotate it. So I deleted what we had, which is pretty expected, and then I'm actually going in here and I'm going to reconnect it to the bridges that are going to come across the river. That's primarily because I do want it to be terrain height as it goes closer to downtown, because again, we're going to utilize some sort of road or highway system in here to cover up a little bit of the terrain change. But this is also going to give us a bunch more room for downtown because I've shifted the interchange away from downtown and further back into the map. So we're going to have some expandability space as we move forward. So I think for now, this is pretty temporary, but we are making progress into what this setup will actually be a little bit later on. So as we zoom out, you can see the city growth. There's some areas I definitely want to tweak. And of course, our infrastructure still leading into just the downtown area is a little bit temporary until we actually implement some highway system in there. But for right now, we do have traffic flowing and the city can operate. So that's good. So let's go ahead and put up some cinematics and you can see how breathtaking Cities 2 can be. And I'm really excited to build this city with you guys. This is a little bit different than what I normally do. So thank you so much for hanging out with me and watching the video. I usually do a lot of educational content, which is on the way, but I felt like we should just start with something pretty relaxed. If you've enjoyed it, be sure to hit the like button. Make sure you subscribed and of course, leave a comment down below with your thoughts and suggestions for future builds. And I'll catch you guys next time.